with a kind of vision for the future, but a very pragmatic vision which is already coming into existence. It's one of the few sustainable economic models available at the moment. Many more and more scholars and people, especially concerned citizens, are looking for alternatives to the current predominant economic model, which we could call a globalized form of capitalism, aligned with free trade, with the free trade model. And that's a model which is creating or co-creating increasingly crisis. Of course, it's also doing good. It's helping to achieve some of our goals. It's satisfying human needs, and it's creating a very specific type of wealth, especially material wealth. But it also has its back and downsides, and the back and downsides are increasing. So we have a very broad range of crises in all fields, from ecological crisis to distribution and social crisis, including hunger, increasing hunger, but also immaterial dimensions of the landscape of crisis, like a crisis of meaning, a crisis of values, and a very strong and steep decrease of democracy in the most recent years. I'm an interdisciplinary researcher. I try to study universal sciences, as there is only one science for me, which is the science of the universe, the universal science. The name university reminds us of this one single verse. Universe means in Latin one single verse. So everything is contained in one wholeness. That's the meaning of universe and followingly university. But our habit is that we create sections of that single knowledge, and what we lose, creating only sections and without keeping the connection to the whole, is we lose wisdom, and maybe we also lose ethics. And ethics is just one discipline and not an inherent part of all disciplines. Maybe the most pressing crisis at the moment are the ecological crisis, and they seem to now motivate governments, including the European Union, to proceed to action and to start shifting their paradigm, to start shifting the paradigm that capitalism is, well, it has its back and downsides, but it's the best model available, and it's doing more good than harm. And exactly this tide has turned. For the first time in 2020, just right before the outbreak of the pandemic, a majority of citizens globally said that capitalism is now doing more harm than good. So the time has come to say goodbye to capitalism as the predominant economic model. Although maybe that attitude or this insight has not arrived at all faculties of economics in the world, but in other areas of life and in the public discourse it has arrived. So I immediately go, just some introductory words, I immediately go to the alternatives, first asking, are there alternatives available? And I already mentioned that there is even a term in the official language of the European Union. They are talking about new sustainable economic models. Well, that's a way to put it. We can also just call them alternative economies. That's a little bit a lower threshold. We just held a course on alternative economies at the University of Cordoba in Argentina. And there were introduced a whole bunch of alternatives, let's say 10 to 12, including the traditional social and solidarity economy, which has a long tradition, especially in the Mediterranean countries, including Kate Raworth's idea of donut economics, including circular and blue economy, including the degrowth approach, which is now spreading quickly in the most industrialized countries, and some others. And just one of them is the economy for the common good. It's the last one in the list because it's probably one of the most recent alternatives. Although the term common good is all the contrary of being recent, I will get back to that. Just the idea of an economy for the common good is quite new. We started only in 2010 in Austria and some parts of Germany and Italy. And this initiative with this name, Economy for the Common Good, which I'm going to introduce now, is a holistic alternative, which means in a first understanding, it's not just a theory of change, it's not just an alternative economic model with 20 cornerstones to rebuild and reshape after having rethought the economy, but 20 cornerstones from property to labor to ecological resources to working time and so on and so forth. Tax system, these are brick buildings, building bricks and cornerstones. But this is just one dimension of the alternative. The other dimension is it was a movement from the beginning. It was a movement especially but not exclusively from entrepreneurs, mainly small and medium-sized companies, not only social entrepreneurs, also conventional entrepreneurs, but with an ecological and ethical responsibility in their principal attitude of being an entrepreneur. Now we have broadened up our approach and collaborations. We are collaborating with businesses on the one hand, municipalities and cities on the other, and third dimension is educational institutions from schools to universities. We just held our second scientific conference of the Economy for the Common Good at the University of Valencia in Spain, again at the Faculty of Economics and Business, because there was established the first chair of Economics for the Common Good in 2017. And that's not everything. There is a third pillar or a third dimension, if you prefer, and the third dimension asks about the process of implementation. Because on the one hand, we are just creating voluntary practices. That's the second bubble. But it's not within a legal framework. It's just voluntary action of good-willed people based on new ideas, which is the first bubble. A third bubble would be the legal framework, which is a necessary fundament of a mainstream model. In the side stream, at the edge or in the fringe, to say, it's always possible to build an alternative, but an alternative can only turn into the mainstream if the legal framework is changed accordingly, and we go for that. And in the theory of change, we propose all these changes in the legal system, in the legal framework for the economy. But considering the current power relations in our society, there are minorities that are very powerful, so it will not be easy at all to change the legal framework, although large democratic majorities would wish to do so. This is now a problem of our democracies, and I already mentioned that democracies are in sharp and steep decline. I'm referring to an institute at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. It's called Varieties of Democracy. You can take a look. They are now publishing an annual report on the state of democracies worldwide. They have 4 categories of state governance. It's liberal democracies, electoral democracies, electoral autocracies, and closed autocracies. And it's a shame, but Austria, my country, was just rated down from a liberal democracy, which is the best class, to only an electoral democracy. But I agree. So it's I could give a whole speech on that, but I just mention it. And the decline of democracy in Austria is rather typical than non-typical. And that's why we gave a deep thought on how we could improve and strengthen and further develop our democracies. And the result of that field of thought and also practice, which would actually start in the compulsory schools, we call sovereign democracy, which is again from a Latin etymology. Sovereign comes from the Latin word superanus, and superanus means in Latin to stand above all. And if we once clarify cleanly who stands above everything else in a democracy, then things would become clearer and easier, and we would get better results of sovereign democracies than of that kind of democracies that we used to have today. But that's a different story. We'll touch it at the end of my presentation. I will start with the theoretical model and touch some very basic questions, because it's not only a problem of power relations and accordingly of deficiencies of our democracies, what we're facing today. It's also an ideological crisis in the meaning of a flawed science. And I refer to economic science. I wish the Vice Dean would still be with us, then we could have a nice discussion on the state of economic science, of economics, which has been named a dismal science, and I think it's the only discipline in the concert of scientific disciplines that has ever been called a dismal, an opaque, an intransparent, and I would add an inconsistent and deeply incoherent science. And one of the reasons why this science is called a dismal science is because it doesn't give clarity on very basic questions, starting with the definition of economy. Good luck with finding a clear and broadly shared definition of economy in textbooks of economics. If you have one, please show me. Of course, if there is no clear and broadly shared definition of what the economy is, how can we have a common understanding of what the goals of the economy are? But this is of utmost importance if you want to investigate duly a subject. Third point, if there is no clarity, no full clarity about the goal, how can we measure success on diverse levels of the economy, on the macro level, on the meso level of companies, and on the micro level of, let's say, finance, that's the third. And the last one, there is again no clarity if economics is clearly a social science, where everything, all investigated phenomena are man-made, or if it's partly or tendentially a natural science, where phenomenon just can be investigated and maybe even laws, durable laws, can be discovered. You hear my language. I'm talking like a natural scientist, because if we can investigate natural phenomenon in natural sciences, and maybe, if you're lucky, we find natural laws. In economics, that's clearly not the case. There is nothing of something like natural phenomenon in economic science. That's why it's very risky to talk about economic laws, but economists do. And with that language, with using the term law, they indicate or create the impression, if not the illusion, that economics is a kind of natural science. And this, of course, is disencouraging people from creating their own idea of how the economy should be designed and could be designed democratically. But that's what it's all about. The economy is, in every case, an idea of humans, how it should be practiced and regulated, and the regulation of a specific practice is a political task, and ideally a democratical a task of democracies. Well, these are some preliminary remarks, and now we step into the model, at least superficially. And having said what I have said before, I start with a definition, with a proposal of a definition of economy. And even that question has a previous question. And the previous question of the definition of economy is the economy an isolated phenomenon which we can investigate by itself? Or does it only make sense to think about and investigate the economy within its broader context, such as the democratic community, such as the cultural values that exist in that region or country or on the planet, and maybe most importantly, the planetary ecosystems, which are the fundament of all economic activities. And taking into consideration, but economics textbooks don't used to start this way. Economics textbooks used to start without any context. And they just jump into markets. In the worst cases, they jump into highly sophisticated mathematical models. And that's why I'm proposing this. We should start with asking for a definition of what economy is, taking into account its broader context. And as a consequence of this bigger picture, our proposal of a definition of the economy is that economy is about the satisfaction of mainly basic human needs, respecting fundamental democratic values, and staying within the ecological planetary boundaries. So it's a threefold definition: focus on the satisfaction of basic needs of humans, respecting fundamental democratic values. This is an ethical and also political and democratical dimension within the ecological planetary boundaries, which is an ecological dimension. That is, if you want so, a dimension of natural science of the economy, but as a boundary. And well, that's just an offer for definition. And as a consequence of that definition, the proposed goal for all economic activities is the common good, as simple as that. So in our proposal, the overarching objective of all economic activities should be the common good. Of course, that's a normative approach. And now if economists were serious and due scientists, I would not have to add anything. But as many economists think that they are objective, positivistic, and value-free thinkers, now I have to defend myself, and I have to defend the normative of the economy for the common good against other ideas of the economy. For instance, the idea of an economy in which money goes first, and it's all about accumulating capital. And now I have to argue this is not the natural way to understand and to practice the economy. It's just a different normative approach towards the economy. And why I have to say this? Because there are hundreds of mainstream economists which said, no, we're not interested in the economy for the common good because it's a normative approach to the economy. And ours is value-free. It's non-normative, it's objective. We are scientists. And saying we are scientists, they mean that they are quasi-physicists. And it's hard to believe for me as a social scientist, and as you want to think about when I introduced my last book at the University of Economics and Business of Vienna. One of the mainstream professors of economics, he said, we are like physicists. So they really believe it. And they believe that what they are doing is not normative, and and touching the economy for the common good as a normative approach, they think they can distinguish something. And my argument, my point is that this distinction is an illusion, and their approach is as normative as any other approach, because every approach to the economy is normative. Just the values are different, and this is just a different value system. And in the value system of capitalism, money is a higher value than human dignity and democracy and social cohesion and human rights and climate stability or the protection of biodiversity. So it's just a different value system, and mainstream economists should be honest about that, or should be more reflexive on what they are thinking and teaching. And I give a more concrete example. This is one of the leading textbooks of microeconomics, and what they do is they are not being scientific, because if they were scientific, they would say one possibility is that we consider companies and businesses as organizations that strive for financial profit. And a different alternative option is that companies can be understood as organizations that strive for the greater good, for the common good. And now choose which you prefer. You can choose either version, but none of them is natural. Both of them stem from our minds, and we can practice this either way. But they don't do it. They just say the theory of companies is just there is no alternative to this kind of natural law. Although, and now it becomes interesting, although 2,300 years ago, Aristotle was much more scientific, because he did not even distinguish these two extremes, and these two options are just two options of many more options in between and beyond these poles, let's say, profit maximization and maximization of the common good. But he even gave these two options two different terms. So that's a very sharp scientific distinction. He called the one oikonomia, and oikonomia was by definition an economy for the common good, because he said in an oikonomia it's about the well-being of all members of the household. So the well-being of all members of the household we could call it the common good. And he said very clearly, money and capital are just means to help achieve the greater good, the common good. And if this relation of goal and means was inverted, if material means like money, capital became the goal, then this would not be considered as oikonomia, as economy any longer. It would turn the oikonomy in its opposite into chrematistics, into chrematistike in ancient Greek. And for me, that's a lucid distinction between two different understandings of the economy, which actually should figure in the introductory chapters of all economics textbooks, but they don't do. The tendency is that only one understanding of the economy is presented to students, and for me that's something between brainwashing and manipulation in education, but it's not scientific and serious. Okay, so Aristotle, was he an exception? No, he wasn't. Up to Adam Smith, at least, there was almost a consensus that the common good should be the overarching goal of economic activities. And we know, the general public and most economic students know Adam Smith for two sayings: the invisible hand and the legitimation of egoism. And of course, you can read this into Adam Smith, but if you read the whole Adam Smith and read him duly, then the essence of his thinking is all the contrary. And he even titled a chapter of his first book. He wrote The Wealth of Nations, and previously The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And in the theory of moral sentiments, he dedicated a whole chapter to universal benevolence. And why did I pick out that? Because in that quote that we know from the baker, the brewer, and the butcher, he says it's not the benevolence of the baker, brewer, butcher from which we expect our daily dinner, also which creates the common good, let's say. So what most students know, it's not the benevolence. That's what we learn. But there is a whole chapter of not only benevolence, but universal benevolence. So that's a completely different Adam Smith than that one that is usually taught in mainstream economics. And there's a great summary of Klaus Dirksmeier back to presence. And he says that over a little bit more than 2,000 years, so we're not talking about centuries, we're talking about millennia, it was consensus that economic activity should both be legitimated as well as limited by a certain overarching goal, and he put the common good as this overarching goal. And maybe I jump now to our current constitutions. What Dirksmeier proposes is not the rare finding of an historian, but it's what it is included today in our constitutions. Just we hardly know it because economics textbooks tell us something very differently. If we take a closer look at our constitutions, you will not find a single constitution that legitimates Χρηματιστική or capitalism. But you will find many constitutions that legitimate the common good economy. So if Aristotle said oikonomia is an economy for the common good, and Χρηματιστική is capitalism, which we should avoid, he said very clearly, our constitutions have opted very clearly for oikonomia. So there is a strong legal fundament for oikonomias, which is economies for the common good, and there is no single legal / constitutional legitimation for capitalism, which is our predominant system today. And now, how do we know that we have capitalism today and that we do not have economy today? My recent book in only German is called "This is Not Economy." How do we know that what we are practicing and analyzing and teaching at universities today is not economy? Well, looking at the third level, which is success measurement. And I haven't found contradiction to the thesis that success is now really always and everywhere measured against the achievement of the goal, and not against the availability of resources. If you contradict, please do so. But so far, no one has contradicted, and everybody agrees that success is measured against the goals. And if we take a look what we are doing today, we see very clearly that as we are measuring success in the economy, not against the goal, which is the common good, as we saw in our constitutions, but against the means, against monetary resources or capital, this is not economy. This is capitalism, which has no constitutional basis. Constitutions say the goal of economic activities is the common good. Well, then, if we want to practice a due and correct methodology of success measurement, we would have to measure an economy's achievements against this goal. And this is the contribution of the economy for the common good. Let's define economy, let's define the goals of the economy. Actually, we already have that. It's in the constitutions. But then, third step, let's measure economic success against the democratically defined goal of the economy, with a common good product for national economies, with a common good balance sheet for companies, and with a common good assessment for investments on a micro level. Common good product, let's start with that one. We already have some predecessors. We have the gross national happiness in Bhutan. We have the Better Life Index by the OECD. We have an Happy Planet Index, and we have the Sustainable Development Goals, which we could consider as something like a common good product. The only thing what we do not have is something composed directly and in a bottom-up process by the citizens. That's our proposal. The economy is for the people, so let's the people decide what is the concrete meaning of the common good. And the idea is to organize participatory processes in a city like Split, in a country like Croatia or Austria, or maybe later even at the level of the European Union. And of course, people will make many proposals. What are the most important ingredients of the common good in their view and understanding? But we can sort out the 20 most powerful ones, which are the finalists. And these 20 finalists would be the sub-goals of the common good product. And once we have 20 sub-goals, we can operationalize them with measurable indicators. Just very easy example. We could take life expectancy, which is measurable, as an indicator for the sub-goal of a healthy life. Just a very easy example. And thanks to these measurable and comparable indicators, we can create a quantitative aggregate, even one number or one percentage between 0 and 100% as an index. So we're actually thinking of proposing a common good index rather than a common good product. And that could be compared with the result of last year, and it could be compared, if a country wants to be compared against another country, it could be compared with the common good index of Slovenia or Austria, if that's the desire. Well, and once such a democratic process has, and of course, if a common good product or index rises, then people would have full certainty and guarantee that they are either healthier or happier or more solidary or more sustainable or more democratic or more peaceful. Only that what counts most, what matters most in their lives will be included, because everything else will not be among the 20 finalists. And that's really a vision. Maybe that's already the key. If a country defines with the participation and the involvement of its citizens its vision of a good life for everybody, that would be a true oikonomia in the original meaning translated into presence. And well, once composed with a good index, the balance sheet of companies could easily be derived from the macro level with the simple question: what's the contribution of a single company to the national common good product or common good index? So it would pose the very same 20 questions to every organization, no matter if it's a company, a municipality, or a university. And now comes a very important innovation. We would not only ask companies to write nice reports, sustainability reports, but we would then evaluate these reports in a quantitative manner with an external audit and make their score visible to the general public. Let's say in 5 steps, and then we have companies with a very high score, which would be the most sustainable and responsible companies, and companies with a poorer score. And as the last step, we then could link incentives to those who are doing best to the society and the planet and the future generations, and inversely do do least good or do worst to these values. And today what happens, those who do better than others in ethical terms, they have higher costs because they pay fairer wages and they offer a higher degree of social security and they use higher ecological benchmarks. So they have higher costs, they have higher prices, they have a competitive disadvantage in the markets. And those who, who do harm, they have a competitive advantage. And this is nonsensical, this is counterproductive, and this is not what we want in an intelligent design of the market economy. And a more intelligent design of the market economy would be that those who do good pay less taxes and get a public contract and a cheaper loan from the bank, and others get a more expensive loan and do not get a public contract and pay higher taxes. And the consequence would be that, that the most sustainable and responsible product and healthy products would be cheaper for consumers than the less sustainable and healthy products. And in other words, markets would be in line with the fundamental values of our society. This is the main analysis of ours today. Market forces, which are not natural laws. we can design markets and market forces in either direction. And today, market forces in capitalistic markets work against our fundamental values, against human dignity, against social justice, against ecological sustainability, and against democratic participation. And in an economy for the common good, which still would be a market economy, but with markets whose forces would work in line with our fundamental values. So they would enhance and strengthen from human dignity to ecological sustainability. This would be an ethical market economy. It would not be capitalism, but it would not fall back into socialism either. It would be something in between. And one of the several reasons why it's so difficult for some of us to think of alternatives to capitalism which are not socialism is because there were leading economists who said there is nothing in between these two extremes. Either one extreme or the other. Don't even think about searching for alternatives. And this is anti-liberal, and it's against the freedom of science and the freedom of thought. And of course there are alternatives. There are many and plenty of alternatives. That's what was on my introductory slide. And only if we recognize capitalism and socialism as opposed extremes, we can think of an alternative or of many alternatives in between. And the lucid legacy of Aristotle is that oikonomia, economy actually, is an alternative between these two extremes. So an economy for the common good is a redundant concept. It's actually the creation of an economy worthy that term. Okay, that was the theoretical model. It has 20 cornerstones, that's what I mentioned. So if you're interested in a deeper read or talk, there is a lot more. Just mentioning ecological human rights, just mentioning ethical world trade. Now there is not the time to dig deeper into the model. So we'll briefly introduce the movement, which is carrying and co-creatively developing this model. The movement started in 2010, so we are celebrating our 12th anniversary this autumn. and we spread to some 33 countries. I made a stop yesterday in Zagreb, where the local chapter of Zagreb, well, I got to know them, and they have now officially founded the first local chapter in Croatia. And yeah, it's one of 30 countries in which we have local chapters, and 12 countries have found a national umbrella association for the promotion and the creation of or implementation of the model in their country. And they are held together by an international federation which is seated at Hamburg at the moment. Yeah, so we are known by our companies. At the moment we are reaching progressively 1,000 companies from all branches that are doing a common good balance sheet voluntarily. 7 banks have done so, and we are our companies are receiving plenty of sustainability awards, and climate protection award at the Conference of Parties in Poland was that one, and the awardee is a public health insurer because they managed to decrease the meat consumption of their clients due to arguments. So they did not force them, they did not push them, they just argued successfully, and that's why they got the Climate Action Award at Katowice in Poland. Yeah, we're also trying to found an ethical bank in Austria. We did not get a license similar to an attempt in Croatia, but we're now partnering with existing banks, and we created the first common good current account in Austria, which has now 1,000 clients and savings accounts with 15 million euros. It's a start. Then we have more and more municipalities and cities that are implementing the tools of the economy for the common good on diverse levels. And as already said, there is a growing scientific network, and we just had our second scientific conference with 70 participants. So it was not a huge conference, it was a modest but very focused conference. And of course, we are inviting interested scholars from neighboring disciplines or models, from the social and solidary economy to the B Corps, from donut economics to SDG researchers and the like. And of course, we are working hard to get first regulations in favor of the economy for the common good. And just one very very first regulation in favor of the economy for the common good, and at the same time social and solidary economy, was in the region of Valencia in Spain. So this was a decision of the government of Valencia, and it's a first achievement, and we hope that it will be replicated in many more regions. And you see, it's not an exclusive promotion of the economy for the common good. It can be combined with the promotion of from focular movement to circular economic activities. There's also an opinion from the Economic and Social Committee from the European Union, which has been approved by a majority of 86% of its members, to include the economy for the common good in the legal framework of the European Union. So far, excellent. Just European Commission, who has the monopoly of legislative initiative in the European Union, has actually done nothing so far. So in my last, well, I have to ask Bruno if I get 3 more minutes for the last dimension, because if we project this tendency just in a linear way, economy for the common good and neighboring alternatives will become mainstream sooner or later. I doubt it, because we haven't talked about power relations, and we haven't talked about the the lack of democracy, which is getting bigger, as I mentioned twice in the beginning. So what we are dreaming about is a deepening and improvement of democracy itself. We call it sovereign democracy because it would mean that the highest instance, which actually theoretically is already the highest instance in a democracy, just the people, the citizens, that they would get the according rights. I call them sovereign rights, and to my own astonishment, I'm a political scientist, that's what I studied. This term does not exist in political science. We're talking about individual fundamental rights. Human rights are individual fundamental rights, but we are not talking about collective fundamental rights, which sovereign rights would be. These are collective rights, not of a single person, but of the whole democratic body or collective. And this is just the result of a first brainstorming of myself, which could be the collective fundamental rights. And now I would love to start a new conference, but I just give you one example. What is happening in Chile at the moment is the highest of these. And what is happening in Chile is that the citizens as a collective rewrite the constitution from scratch. This is for me the highest collective fundamental right, because the constitution is the highest document in a democracy. And in the constitution, you can redistribute the power in the state. You can maintain the division of powers, or you can enlarge the division of powers. And actually, in a nutshell, that's what it would be. It would add to the 3 existing powers, to the legislative, executive, and judicial power, add not a 4th, but a first one, which would be the constitutive power. And the constitutive power would constitute and establish all the other powers. It would be the first power in the state. And as a consequence of that, it could reserve for itself some complementary rights, which would not question at all parliaments or governments, let alone the judicial power, but it would counterbalance some of the excesses of power that governments and parliaments especially enjoy today. I give you an extreme example, but it's an important example. If government decided to go to war, today, in hardly any country, the citizens can say, no, you do not say that. And there are 2 options. One option is that the constitution already says that the government is not allowed to take this decision. So if a country went to war, this decision would have to be taken by the citizens. This could be in the constitution. And the second reform would be that if the government takes or wants to take such a decision, the people can prevent the parliament from passing the according law, or a minister as well. This is now jumping very quickly into something, but all this is now possible in Chile. So it's not a pure utopia. It's something very concrete happening in the present in a country in South America. And just to end that, some of these rights do already exist. So it's not just a pure dream. Some elements of this dream have already come true in some countries. And my last example is if we had that mindset, no? It's a new mindset. We are the sovereign instance. We are the sovereign body. We can decide everything. At least we can rewrite the constitution in a way that we have the potential power to change any economic order element. For instance, inequality. We could just decide that inequality cannot be unlimited, but it has to be limited, which is not the elimination of inequality, because that's again the black and white discussion. If someone criticizes the excess and the unlimitedness of inequality, immediately what they say is, well, are you a socialist or what? No, I'm not a socialist. I just want to limit inequality at a reasonable level, and for that I need a reasonable question and a reasonable decision procedure, and we found an extremely reasonable decision procedure, which is not putting one proposal on the table and then everybody has to be in favor of that proposal or against that proposal, and we create a strong political tension, emotional tension in the society with this poor decision procedure. And one of the many alternatives that exist, found by two mathematicians of University of Graz, is systemic consensus, which means if there is a proposal on the table which is not best for everybody, those who think that they have a better proposal can put it on the table too. But they only can put it on the table if they're convinced that their proposal will achieve a better result. And now comes the second innovation, not in the meaning of affirmation, of hooray, yes, we do that. No, but in the meaning of lower resistance. I don't have the time to explain it in detail, just very briefly. The procedure of resistance measurement helps to find that solution that, if it's implemented, creates the least resistance in the whole population. It causes the least pain and causes the least restriction of liberty in all citizens. And now I give you the concrete example. This is the limit. These are proposals to limit inequality in income. And on the left side, the figures are the maximum multiple of the highest income in relation to the lowest income. So it would be 4 times, 5 times, or 15 times. That would be the highest income according to the legal minimum income. Usually, the range of proposals is not really broader. So it's all about 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, sometimes 30 times, very rarely 50 or 100 times, very rarely. And the winner, which you see is the proposal that meets the least resistance, only 1 vote of resistance. Every person has 2 votes of resistance, no arm, 1 arm, or 2 arm of resistance. And the least number of resistance votes, only 1, was in this case factor 8. So there is a valley of resistance, the lowest point of resistance with factor 8, and you see that socialism, no inequality at all, and capitalism, unlimited inequality, meet equal resistance in where? In so far 25 countries. It's a pity that I don't have the time to play the game with you, so I just inform you what has happened so far in 25 countries. But if factor 8 is not the winner, usually the winner is factor 10. That's the most frequent winner. And if you compare the most frequent winner of this game in 25 countries with the existing state of the art in just selected countries, then you see that this innovative procedure of decision making would make a difference. And that's why we propose sovereign democracy in the third bubble as a twin dimension to the content proposal of an economy for the common good. Yeah. So if you are interested in this idea, you have the opportunity to join the movement or co-create it in your country, in Croatia or in any other country. Thank you for your attention.